So as I mentioned, we have, our entire project is called Participatory Arts, but it includes at least 3 parts. It includes the exhibition, Crafting Social Change, and the symposium, and then if you saw the flyers outside, 4 artist workshops that are happening right now in the fall throughout November. And I always love showing old pictures of the settlement. Most of you in the room know these images and know the settlement, but just to remember what used to be here and to think about this model, how immersive it was in the neighborhoods. It's hard to see that present day, and the kinds of services that they were offering, and how, and the physical structures that they were offering through, just to see the density, I think is so important to always show pictures. As many of you know, and we've talked about this in preparation for the symposium, when people think about Hull-House, they're mostly thinking about advocacy and social services. And they're not thinking necessarily about the arts. And they were extremely pervasive. What surprises most people is, you can't really see it here, this is where the mansion and now the museum is this building was the first building that was created as part of the settlement building when they moved to the neighborhood in 1891, and that is the Butler Art Gallery. It was so important to them to have arts available to people, to think about it as a big part of people becoming engaged citizens in a democratic society. Here's a better picture of it. You can see the museum as well. This is one of our lead images for the project. There were all sorts of classes that were offered in painting and weaving and sculpture. You're going to hear a lot more about this from our next guest speaker, the artists who were involved, who were featured. But you can see that they were in many rooms throughout the settlement, upstairs, downstairs. I think in this room we actually had, I'm saying we as if I'm there, but it was the music school. So they were throughout various buildings of the settlement. Classes for children, but also adults as well. And of course, Ellen Gage Starr is an important figure, often forgotten in the history, and you'll hear a lot more about her role in the arts and all that she offered from Annie's store in our first panel discussion. I just want to put out there some of the core values that we're thinking about and looking at within participatory arts, because you can say participation, but what does that mean? So this is sort of putting it out there for all the panel discussion to unpack. These ideas of participation. It's participation can happen in so many forms, and more passive, more active on the spectrum. But what does equitable participation look like? Is one of the questions, and what kind of participation was being encouraged at Hull-House, and what kind of participation are we encouraging now? Collective work. The collective is not just coming together. It's also thinking about interdependence and how we come together. And so in thinking about what makes, again, equitable collective work and working together, what happened at Hull-House and what continues to happen. And then thinking about social change. The Hull-House, one of the exciting things about Hull-House is that it represented a spectrum of social reform to radical social change, and that they debated these issues about social change. So, as you do programming interpretation, you use these huge words and categories, but they're here for us today and tomorrow to unpack and think about these questions together. Of course, Louise Knight, Jane Addams' biographer, has taught me to always include Jane's voice somewhere, and I thought this was one of the quotes that really captured her connection to art and also collective work. The situation demands the consciousness of participation and well-being, which comes to the individual when he is able to see himself in connection and cooperation with the whole. It needs the solace of collective art inherent in collective labor. So we produced an exhibition that is not comprehensive of all the artist and arts programs that were offered here at Hull-House. We selected 4 that we were interested in uncovering, and those 4 areas are represented in the exhibition and is how we design the symposium. The panels represent those categories as well. So our first one, I'm not going to talk too much about this history because they're going to be covered in these panel discussions. The first one, we're looking at the connections between craft and labor, and featuring the bookbindery of Ellen Gates Starr and her role. She and Jane Addams had different ideas about art and the role of art, and you'll hear a lot about that in our first panel discussion, and maybe for our first presentation. The Labor Museum, which was one of Jane Addams' creations in 1900, was also a part of this project for people to be able to perform their traditional craft. And Jane Addams really saw it as an extension of their labor. It was started in 1900, and when you go to the museum next door, you'll see some of this history represented. I'm sure the Labor Museum will come up in some of the discussions. Our second, or another category that we're looking at, are ceramics and murals. As many of you know, there was a very important program here called the Hull-House Kilns that ran for 10 years, and one of the very well-known artists who became well-known as Jesus Torres here, you're going to hear a lot about in these discussions. We have over 300 items in our collection, and they're beautiful, but also extremely important to think about the history, the demographics, the Mexican-American migration and settlement patterns, to think about questions of identity and representation. And it was really important for us to put as many as we could out on display for people to see, rather than to keep them in storage, protected, although we still aren't protecting them. We're still preservationists. So this exhibition, Participatory Arts, has allowed us to display over 100, which is a third of our collection. Prior to this, there were less than 15 items out, so it's very exciting. It's almost like a visible study collection, and we've been receiving a lot of great feedback for people who study this work and are raising some of these questions. This book is still the authority on the ceramics, Pots of Promise, and we're very excited that Cheryl Gans is with us here today and during the symposium to talk about the important work that she did with the research and interviewing people about their contributions, while they were still alive, to the project. This is the beautiful kiln stamp that's on the bottom of a lot of the ceramics that you might not be able to see in the exhibition. We also are looking at the origins of art therapy. Sadie Ellis Garland Dreichers, who is an artist until she became an art therapist, is often called the matriarch of art therapy. And when we talk about legacy, there's a direct legacy to the art therapy program and to Adler University. So Jennifer LaCivita is here today to talk about that genealogy and important history. Certainly, some of the most research material we have is the performing arts and theater history at Hull-House. Hull-House had a 300-seat theater in the settlement, which people do not know about, and an amateur group called the Hull-House Players. Hull-House is seen as where the birth of the Little Theater movement happened, and improv was created, and we are lucky to have here Aretha Sills, who's part of the symposium, who's Paul Sills' daughter, who started Second City, and the granddaughter of Viola Spolin, who was a very important theater director here at Hull-House. We have a number of playbills, you'll see next door, and different materials from this history that we've been pulling out and making these connections to Second City when we think about legacy of this history in Chicago.